All right. Well, I want to start by thanking everyone for coming out and listening to us talk today about creating highly dynamic apps using Google Tag Manager. I'm Russ Ketchum. I'm the lead product manager for Google Analytics for Apps and also Google Tag Manager.
And my name is Neil Rhodes, and I'm the engineering lead for the Google Tag Manager for mobile apps.
So I want to describe a problem to you that you as developers all know pretty well. Now here, just kind of quick show of hands. Who in here actually is an app developer, iOS, Android? All right, so the vast majority of you. Awesome. So this is a problem you all know really well, and that is once you ship your app, it's frozen, right? I mean, it's locked in. It's stuck. And it's effectively cast in stone. And so what that means is if you want to make even the tiniest change to your app, you're now stuck with this multi-step, kind of indeterminate amount of time, how long it's going to take to get from point A to point D on here, who knows how many other sub-steps there are in between. And it's really complicated. So, first you start by needing to secure approvals, whether or not these are internal approvals or if you're going through an app store that requires approvals. Then you actually have to physically ship your new version. You have to wait for an upgrade cycle to happen. And then even at the end of that, you're left with this version uncertainty where some of your users have upgraded, others haven't. You're using tools like Google Analytics to figure out who's using what version. And so it's very difficult for you as a developer to ensure that all of your users are having kind of the consistent experience or even the targeted experience that you intend for them to have. And so today, we're here to propose an alternative. And that is pretty simple. It's make your app highly configurable and then use the Google Tag Manager SDK. And so when you do that, you actually take this process, again, however many steps it is, and you collapse it to a model where you are in charge of communicating your changes directly with your users. And you can be confident that that's going to happen within roughly 12 hours. So I want to introduce Neil, and he's going to actually explain to you how it works.
So as Russ described, what you're going to do is make your application highly configurable. What does that mean? That really means you're going to take all of the static configuration that you normally do in an application via constants and instead make key value pairs and respond to those keys. What sorts of things might you want to configure? Well, if you're using AdMob, for example, you might want to configure how often ads occur, or how long they're there, or where they occur on the screen. If you're communicating with a back-end server, right, what is the host name that you're connecting to? What is the path you're using if you're using HTTP? Right? And that's something that might change over time that you want to be able to configure. Gameplay, if you've got a game, how much are particular things worth in terms of play? Okay, how many lives do you get if you kill the bad guy? If you have URLs in your application that refer to help or upgrades or things like that, what are those URLs? UI settings. What colors do you use? You've got a buy button. What color is going to work best? Is a red best? Is a blue best? And what if you change your mind later on? What's the text of that button? What features might you have that you want to only deploy at some later time? Miscellaneous, some message of the day that you want to display to the user. So here's a basic idea. In a nutshell, it's like this. Take the constants in your application and replace them with calls to Google Tag Manager. As an example here, we have a timeout. 1,500 milliseconds. Is that really the right number? Right? We were sitting there coding, and at the time, that seemed like the right number. Okay? But what if it turns out that should really be 1,800 or 1,200? Okay? By making a call to the container, which contains our values, we can get the timeout in milliseconds, and that will give us the current setting for that key. And similarly, we can have a whole host of keys in our application and get those values, and know that we're going to get the latest values for those. So here's an example. You're using AdMob to monetize your application. AdMob has one of the parameters that you use is the banner size, and there are a set of constants. One constant is banner, which is, I believe, a 320 by 50 banner. Another is smart banner, which configures it based on the size of the screen. Which one do you want to use? Well, smart, because it's smart, right? It must be better. But maybe there are circumstances where banner is better. And why not hedge your bets and actually just make a value for a key that says the banner size to use? Get that string value and then convert it to the appropriate enumeration. And then it gives you the flexibility later on of changing your mind. Similarly, do you want to add at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen? Well, I don't know. I looked, and my product manager looked, and we decided the top was better. But maybe it'll turn out that the bottom might be better later on. That might monetize better. So again, hedge my bets by having a Boolean that specifies what I want. And then when I create my ad view, depending on the value of that Boolean, either at the beginning of my layout view or the end of my layout view. So a small amount of code for that. Here's an example for content. So what we're doing here is just creating a JSON, right, with keys and values. And this is for content, what our URLs are. As you know, URLs are not always constant. We sometimes do want to change them. This gives us the opportunity to do that. We might have a much larger group of key value pairs, and so can actually use a hierarchy, as in here, where our top level hierarchy is physics or target. So this is an example we're going to see in a moment of a game, which has a physics engine for basically landing a lunar lander. So we have constants for the gravity, the down acceleration per second, the fire, so that is when we turn on our thrusters, how much acceleration is there, fuel, all those sorts of things, which normally you just create as constants, but really do affect the gameplay and might make sense to have configurable. So how does this actually work? You create a container. We're going to look at the initialization of that container in the SDK in a little bit. But you create it, and then you go via web browser to Google Tag Manager and edit the settings for your various keys. So change the values you want. And then what happens? Your application, which has been written and uses the SDK will actually go up and periodically poll for new container values, okay, where that periodic is once every 12 hours. So it'll go grab that new container and then save it locally. As you're making calls to get values for your keys, it's not going to the network at that point. Instead, it's using the saved container and just going and grabbing those values. So let's look at a demo. I've got a lunar lander. This is the lunar lander, basically, that you may have all seen from one of the Android sample apps. Okay. I've modified it slightly to use the Google Tag Manager. So what we have is a lander. I'm trying to land in the landing pad on the bottom right. And I'm really not very good at this. And so I always crash. Okay? There are a number of reasons. I always go too fast, but also that pad is very hard to land on. Okay? We ship this to users, and we find that they try playing it 3 or 4 times like me and can't win and give up and go on. And so it doesn't monetize very well. Okay? And we get bad reviews. So it turns out we'd like to make that pad bigger. How can we do that? So I've got here Google Tag Manager. We have different versions. So I have over time published several versions of these container values. Let's look at the version we have right now. And let's look at this collection of values. So what I see here is various values, again, for the physics, and then also this target controls that target at the bottom. And I can change the width. Let's say I change it from 1.6 to 3. I don't really know what the units are, but I know this will be about twice as wide, right? Which sounds good. Save this. And now that doesn't change it immediately, right? There are many things I might want to change in my container, various values. Once you create a version, that'll actually create a numbered version, and then you can publish it. And now that's live. So what that means is, as lunar lander applications check back in to the Google Tag Manager on the web, they'll get this new version of the container. Where the change is, we've changed the value of 1.6 to 3. So what does that mean? That means if I wait 12 hours here, or maybe on average 6 hours, I'll get this new value. So, well, no, let's not wait. So this particular version of the application is a debug version that is checking back a lot more often for demo purposes. And as you see here now, it has a much wider landing pad. And so now I have a chance of actually landing successfully. And I think I've done it once out of 20 times. So I used to actually pay quarters to play this as a kid, but as I remember, I was better at it. OK, so that's just a quick example of this server-side configuration. You just want to change a value and have it reflected. What's the code you have to write for this? Well, first, you need a small amount of initialization. Okay? The first thing you actually do is go to Google Tag Manager, create an account, and create what we call a container. And you get from that a container ID. So this distinguishes that collection of values. We initialize the tag manager and then create a container, okay, or open the container, rather, with open saved, passing that same container ID. What will that do? Well, it'll spawn a separate thread to go and try and read that saved container from disk. Okay? Remember that it caches that saved container on disk. And if that container is not there, or if it's older than 12 hours, it'll go out to the network to try and read the freshest version. In any case, what will happen, while it's doing that, you go along doing your other initialization, and then you call container future.get, which will return back your initialized container. Once you have that container, you have 4 very simple calls: get long, get string, get double, and get Boolean. You give a key, it gives you back the current value for that key. And it's really that simple. One thing to keep in mind, if there is no value defined for the key, it's not going to throw an exception or anything else. It'll return a default value, 0, false, an empty string. There's one slight wrinkle. You ship your application, someone downloads it, and then they go to run it without a network connection. Well, by what I just said, there's no container yet. We haven't actually downloaded one from the network, and we can't because there's no network. Do you really want to get zeros and empty strings and falses for all of your values, right? No gravity makes the game easier. On the other hand, a width of 0 makes it hard. So that wouldn't be good. So as well, you embed and ship within your application default values in the form of a JSON file. Or later on, we'll see you could actually put in a container. So you put all the default values you want, and then these will be used only until the very first time it successfully connects and gets the latest container. And from then, the users will always have the last published container version.
So up until this point, we've been talking about making configuration changes that would affect all of your users. And I think I'd argue, actually, that in and of itself is really powerful. But at its core, Google Tag Manager has a very robust rules engine. And when you use it in concert with these server-side configuration macros, you're actually able to segment your user base and get at very targeted experiences for different sets of your users. So you can actually serve up different configurations based on what types of users you have, where they are, who they are, those type of elements. And Neil's going to show you a little bit more.
So let's say, for instance, you ship your application, and you find out via bug reports from users, and also, let's say, via your analytics crash exceptions, that you have a problem on a particular version of our operating system. Okay? Android 2.2, you've got a particular problem, and a timeout value you're using is too short. Right? You normally use 3,000 milliseconds, and it turns out on this particular OS, you really need to be using 5,000 milliseconds. So you'd like to make a change such that on that version of the OS, you get 5,000, and the other versions, you get 3,000. What do? First thing you do is create a rule that says, I'm trying to target Android 2.2. So as you can see here, what we set up is that the platform is equal Android. Why do we have to specify that? What's the other possibility of the platform? Guesses? iOS, yes. So we have both an iOS and an Android SDK. And then we look at the version starting with 2.2. So we can handle any sub-ones as well. Then we set up a value for our timeout to be 5,000. And then the critical part is we put the two together. So we say this particular macro is only enabled on Android 2.2. So that'll ensure that on those devices will have a value of 5,000. We still need to make sure the others have a 3,000, okay? And only the others. We need to partition all of our users because we don't want to be specifying more than one value, right? We're 3,000, but we're also 5,000 if it's Android 2.2, and then there's the question of which one to use. So we go back and we say, okay, our timeout of 3,000 is going to be enabled always, but we also have disabling rules. So we're going to actually say, if it's the Android 2.2, then we will disable the 3,000 timeout. So your choice is either it's enabled for 2.2, and you have a value of 5,000, or you have a value of 3,000, which is disabled for 2.2. Okay, that's one possibility of what you can do. Another thing you could do, change a value on a given date and time. As an example, let's say you have a feature that you want to launch on a particular day and date. One way to do that is have a version of your application that you deploy at that time. But that feature is not really going to go live until users actually go through and do their updates. Instead, what you might do is go ahead and write that feature behind some flag, some check for a Boolean. And then, as soon as that Boolean switches, that feature is suddenly active. So in this case, we have a particular enable whiz-bang feature is true. And then we have a schedule for when that's going to be true. So it'll have its default value other than during this time period. So it allows you to do all sorts of things, including turn on a particular feature at a particular time. So we've looked at checking things like the platform, the version, indirectly the time. What if it's something distinct to your application or unique to your application? We've got that covered as well. So what you can actually do is have your application publish values, which you can then write rules against. Let's say, for example, in our game here, if we fail to land 3 times or more, then we want to put up some hint to the user. Now that's easy to code, right? But what if that business logic changes? What if you decide that number shouldn't be 3, but instead should be 4, or you don't want to put up a hint at all, or you want to do something else? So what we've done here is we say we have a enable hint is true. So your code is looking, saying, is enable hint true? If so, I'll show a hint. If not, I won't. And then we have a rule associated with that, which is that the number of failed attempts is greater than or equal to 3. Where is that num failed attempts coming from? It's coming from your code. And this is the code you write. You register a handler that it's given basically the name of the thing we're interested in, along with any arguments you want to pass. Your code then runs and executes and delivers back the result. In this case, of course, it's very simple and we don't care about any arguments. What other sorts of macros are there that are available to you out of the box? You've got the screen size, the language the user is using, app version, platform, OS version, and then as well, this backdoor function call where you can really do anything you want. And then operators, both string and numeric operators to deal with those values. Let's look at a demonstration. So let's imagine we ship this application and we find something odd. Okay, what we find is, this is somewhat contrived, I'll admit. We find that the users, we made this landing pad wider, right? And we find that users who are not using English like it. Okay, how do we know that? We both look at their reviews, and we also use Google Analytics and find that if they're using a lot of languages, they interact with the app a lot, and we have good monetization. But for some reason, if they're using English, they don't like it. And if we look at the reviews, they say it's too easy. Okay, so I guess it's everyone but me who can actually do well at that. So we want to go ahead and, with our application already deployed in the field, change it so that it's harder for users when you're running in English than not. Let's look at how we do that. So what I'm going to do is take some of these values. I prefer to copy and paste rather than type because it's so easy to get it wrong. and I'm going to create a new macro. This new macro is going to be hard, let's say. And we are going to make different values for two of these things. We're going to make different values for the width. So instead of being 3, we're going to take it back to we'll make it 1.7. And this is the gravity. And we also want to make it somewhat more difficult for them. So we'll make the gravity be higher. Okay. We don't want this for everyone, though. We need a rule that says it's only true for English users. Right now, we don't have any good rules. So let's create a rule. And this rule is going to be, we're going to call it, I don't know, is English, let's say, or English. And if the language is equal to EN, so these are the 2-character language codes. So this basically says, if we're in English, it's going to make the gravity be 55 and the width of the landing pad 1.7. Remember I told you we also have to make sure to deal with sort of the non-English case. So let's go ahead and make a macro for that. And my copy and paste doesn't work quite so well because I didn't have the right things in there. So I'm going to try and remember what that was. I'm going to call it for a moment gravity. And then the other was the target and the width of 3.0. The key part here, though, is so every rule needs an enabling rule. Right? When should this fire? Well, we want it to fire always. The disabling rule says except. So except for if it's in English. Okay, and I'll need to go back and change gravity to the right name. And then the final thing I need to do is actually go change these values here, right? These are values, again, that are always true, and I need to remove both the width and the gravity. Again, because I need to have this specified only really in one place for a given configuration. Right? At this point, I can go create a version and publish. What I'm going to do instead, especially since I didn't write that gravity right, is go ahead and just publish a previous version that had these settings already done and where I typed it right. So I published that, and that's published. So we now got a rule for English versus non-English. All right, so I'm in English, and in fact, what happened? That looks like about a 1.7 width, doesn't it? Okay, and a fairly high gravity. If I went to a device that had a non-English language, it'd be different. Or let's just go ahead and change the language here. So we'll try Catalan. Not that I particularly understand it. And we come back in and start our game. And now we've got the game that we want for the non-English friends. So this is just an example of how the rules work. You could make these rules based, again, on any of the predefined macros that we have or any settings that you want to have from your application. Preview. So you make changes to your container. And you want to actually try them out before you ship them off to your thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of customers. Right? Kind of makes sense. How do you do that? Well, in GTM, you choose Preview, and it gives you a URL. That URL, you then email or SMS to your device. And from your device, you open that URL. Basically, what we do is register a scheme for you. And it opens your application. But instead of using either the saved container or using the latest published container, it will use the preview container that you just previewed. And you'll then be able to exercise your application, see that it's working correctly, make any modifications you want to in the container, re-preview until you're happy, completely satisfied, then you hit publish, and then your users all start getting it. Best practices. 1, go ahead and do that preview, test it before you publish to your wide world. A second one, read your container values at the right time. Depending on what values you're looking at, you may want to read the values when you start your application. Or in the case here, we went ahead and read as we started a new game. What we would not have wanted done is read as we're doing our physics simulation while the user's going. For 2 reasons. You want sort of your inner loop to be as quick as possible, and we are doing some computation. And second, imagine the user's experience if they're playing the game, right? They're carefully landing. We get a new container at the same time, and suddenly update the gravity and they slam to the ground, right? Not so fun. So it's up to you to determine when makes sense to actually call these container values. And then finally, set the appropriate defaults. I talked about creating the JSON defaults, so you can actually just create a JSON file that contains all your keys and their default values. As well, though, you can actually download from Tag Manager a version of the container. It's just a binary file. It includes those same keys and values, but more importantly, it also includes rules. So you can have your default container include rules and act differentially on different macros and different devices as part of your initial container. Of course, then, it'll still always use the latest version that it gets from the server.
So with that, I hope you can tell Neil and I are pretty fired up about GTM for mobile apps. And it's something that we're announcing today. It's not been generally available up until this point. And we'd like to invite all of you to join the whitelist. You can go to this short URL, fill out a quick form, and that will sign you up for the process, and we'll be adding you in the next few weeks. Also, on your way in or at the back of the room, we had one-sheeters that should give you the exact same information. This link's on there, so you don't need to snap a picture of the screen if you don't want to. And yeah, then you can just go ahead and get at it and hopefully start using GTM in your apps. And with that, I'd like to open it up for some questions. Thank you. I think there's mics in the middle if you guys want to head to those.
So concerning the rules and how they're like I saw the time rule where it says something should be applied for a certain number of days, or and is that controlling when? How do I say this? Is that being evaluated on the device, or is it being evaluated as to when it delivers the updated container?
So that's a good question. Most of the rules. Virtually all the rules, except the one exception you're having there, are evaluated on the device. So there's nothing that's happening on the server. That particular one is done on the server, so it actually controls what's coming down in the container. We are looking to try and add a time-based one that can also run on the device.
Right, because it would control how sharply you could start a feature or end a feature.
Exactly, because the question is, right, do you have to wait sort of the 12 hours for it to trickle down, or does it happen hour and minute?
Yep, that is an important point Neil touches on, though, because a lot of those rules obviously could raise privacy concerns, and so it's critically important from our standpoint that data never comes up over the wire. So that all those different parameters that we're making decisions about for those rules, that's all being evaluated client side.
Okay.
Except that one case.
All right, thanks.
Hi. Can you define a rule based on the device model?
You can. So what we have right now is I don't remember, to tell you the truth. If not, we should add it.
Okay.
So
It will be very useful. Sometimes there are bugs that are not Android specific, Android version specific, but device specific.
yeah, that makes tons of sense, and I just don't remember off the top of my head. But if not, we should have it. And
Yeah,
it's
it
very
may
easy
not
to
be
add.
in the initial set, but it'll be there.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi. I was wondering, how does this affect testability of the app? Is there any way I can swap out configuration when I run unit tests and stuff?
So that's a great question. There are 2 issues for this. So let me see what the best. The unit testing is a good question. I don't have an answer to you this minute. The other question, though, is let's say you have a product manager who, you write some new version, and they want to see what's it going to look like. right? But it's not enabled in your container. You don't want to go publish a new container that'll send it out to the rest of the world. So we actually have the idea of a preview mode where you can actually set values to override what would normally be in the container.
Okay, so that would be something I can use in tests as well.
So what that actually will do is launch your application in this version. It's also a URL. So
Okay.
I don't know how appropriate that would be for testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
let me just think about things. Yeah.
So right now it looks like you primarily support basic data types for your containers. What would be the plan for expanding that to like custom data types or other types of customizability?
What sorts of things are you interested in?
I didn't really have anything specific, but I guess just in general, if you were to create your own classes or have more, if there were some non-standard or non-primitive types that you wanted to configure somehow. Through GTM.
Sure. Our answer right now is, and we may expand this in the future, but right now the answer is if you want, so we have strings. If you have strings, you can do whatever you want. You could, for instance, put JSON in a string and decompile that if you wanted some structured data.
Or figure out a way to serialize something that you could I don't know, abstract into GTM and then re-parcel it or
So
something.
you can do that. We don't have any current plans for making that easier than serializing, deserializing yourself.
Thanks.
Is there a way to create a rule to target a certain percentage of devices so that I could do A/B testing for 5% of devices?
So let me tell you something.
No? Okay.
So prior to December, I was lead of the content experiments team, where we did experimentation for the web. And the way I got into this, so this is not a product announcement, but the way I got into this was I wanted to be able to do experimentation for mobile apps and came up with the concept of doing the keys and values because it made tons of sense to do that as a way to do experimentation. So that you could, for instance, say 30% of my users, I want to do some A/B testing, change this value or that value or these set of values and that set of values. That's how I got into this. And it continues to be a key interest, but we don't have any announcements right now.
Okay, thanks.
But it does make perfect sense.
Hi, you mentioned that most of the rules are evaluated client-side. So if I have a lot of rules, does this mean every time they're all sent to the device?
So this does mean every time they're all sent. We do have the opportunity, we're not doing it right now, but we have the opportunity for sending down differential updates. So if you've got version 10 of the container and version 11 of the container comes down, we can send the diffs instead of sending the entire container. But right now, yes, that is what's happening. Eventually, the entire container has to make it down. Having said that, we do have the opportunity for some server-side optimizations, like there's no reason to send down rules for iOS if it's an Android device. We're not doing that server-side partial evaluation at this point, though.
Thank you.
So we're just about over time. Maybe we can squeeze in just one last question, then I think we'll have to wrap it up.
So you said you have an iOS SDK. Do you have this in the wild in any apps yet for iOS? Has it been through the App Store approval yet?
So actually, there's a piece of functionality we didn't talk about here, which it's called public preview. And so you have the opportunity with kind of the Apple review process when you're going through the iTunes Connect. You can actually provide URLs that anybody with that URL can use to see the experience, because we're hypersensitive to the issue of not wanting to empower developers to ship hidden features. And so that's what these public preview URLs are intended to do. So the premise is effectively build the app the way you want it, and then you as the developer, the onus is on you to kind of communicate everything that your app does to Apple. And you can use these public preview URLs so that their reviewers can actually see exactly the experiences that you're intending to release.
Okay. But you don't know of any apps that have gone through approval yet with this?
No.
Okay.
All right. So I think that's it. Thanks again. One last thing on your way out, if you want to hit those QR codes at the back to rate the session.
And one last thing is we're available at the sandbox, at the analytics sandbox, if you have any further questions or want to talk to us individually. Thanks very
All
much.
right. Thanks, everyone.